Throw yourself back to 2005. BMW have one of the best driving cars, and even till today it's still considered as one of the best, the E46 M3. Now this car was very hard to beat. The Audis of the time were all boring, they were seen as dull, a bit unresponsive, they had the dreaded understeer. So Audi got sick of hardly being on the leaderboard, and in 2006 it was all about to change, and this was the answer. The all-new Audi RS4. They took the standard B7 A4 and gave it new aggressive bumpers, concave wheels and wide tyres, and 4 huge arches which give the car the ultimate road presence and the stance of a pit bull. Now the look of the new RS4 really made this one of the most menacing looking cars on the road at that time. This then was Audi's answer, the 4-door saloon equivalent of Dwayne Johnson. So it was only right that Audi give it an equally deserving engine, and they did just that. This RS4 has the 4.2 naturally aspirated V8 that revs up to 8200 RPM and pushes out a whopping 414 brake horsepower, which means it can do 0 to 60 in just under 5 seconds. Mated with a 6-speed manual transmission and a howling V8, this car is a real driving sensation. Audi really combed through the details with this car, because the interior is just as good. The cockpit is packed with carbon fibre trims, and the steering wheel, well, they plucked one out of the Lamborghini Gallardo. But the party piece is these, the Recaro wingbacks. The B7 RS4 was one of the first cars that these seats were featured in, and originally they were the free factory option for RS4 until Audi actually realised that these were the better option, so they swapped them out with the comfort seats and started charging a premium for them. But that's enough of me rambling on about the techs and specs of this car. Let's jump into it and see how it really performs. Now this specific example, it's got an MRC Stage 2 remap, so it's about 440 brake horsepower. It's got a full Miltech system from the front to back. It's got deleted downpipes, it's got a resonator delete. It's got obviously the bucket seats. But apart from that, there's not much really more to it, and I don't think there is much more you can really do to these, as they are such fine cars out of the box. Now you'll probably remember a few weeks ago we did have the E90 M3 on our channel. This is one of the competitors for that car, but you have to remember the reason that car came out, and as I mentioned in the video, BMW combed through every single thing to make it so driver focused, was because Audi did such a good job of making this the most driver focused RS they'd ever made. And the first thing they did was they took that big 4.2 V8 which they had in the likes of the B6 S4. Now a lot of people will probably say, oh, the RS4's got the same engine as the S4. It actually hasn't. This has been fully redone, and the amount of components that are different, and it really shows in the performance of this car. And this is the one you want compared to the predecessor and even the B8, as that is the same engine, and the only difference between that is that only comes in an Avant model, and it is an S-tronic box, which is pretty unreliable even though it is newer. So this car here is the sweet spot. And like I was saying, Audi needed to make this a driver focused car, so the first thing they tackled was the understeer problem. To do this, they moved the engine as far back as they could, so that did massively help reduce the understeer. Although it is mostly in front of the axle still, it's made a significant difference in the way this car goes into the bends. As well as that, Audi did go for aluminium on the front end, so the wings etc are all aluminium, which makes it a lot lighter in the nose. Don't get me wrong, it hasn't completely eliminated understeer, but it has massively improved it. And this next thing they did was one of the shockers for everyone at the time, because it was totally unconventional for Audi. So where the quattro system was normally a 50-50 split, on this one it's got a torque sensitive differential, so it sent 60% of the power to the back and 40 to the front. So that means if you go into a bend and it does begin to slightly understeer, if you let off, it will give you a cheeky little slip. Which was totally against everything a quattro or an Audi stood for at that time. But whoever's decision it was in Audi to do that, they knew what they were doing, because that matched with the short throw gearbox and the hydraulic steering wheel, which has a lot of response. It's not like the new electric steering wheels. I think even the best of them are not as good as this hydraulic system is. It's got a lot of feel to it. It puts the car exactly where you want it to be, and it's very responsive. Now with today's standards, obviously it's not the fastest car. When it came out, it did 0 to 60 in just under 5 seconds, and there's a lot of small hatchbacks which will probably obliterate it in a straight line. But I guarantee you, any of them cars will not have the same feeling this car has. It is so engaging and so nimble. The engine is also equally just as good, and to be fair with it, it probably is one of the best engines ever made, as Audi did go on then to change the sump on it and put it in a mid-engined exotic car, which was the Audi R8, which shows you just how good it really is. I mean, this car putters along nicely. If it's not in sport mode, with the stock exhaust system you can barely hear it, and you can go around town and do your daily chores. But if you're on some back roads like this, once you press that sport mode and you're in the right gear, this car is an absolute savage. I've always thought of these cars as being a bit boring. I think that's down to the fact that James May picked it over the C63 and M3 in top gear, so it's always had the captain slow connotations linked with it. But you couldn't be more wrong. This car is not slow. And it is bucket loads fun. Just listen to that engine. Downshift when you just rev match it, that little blip it makes, it's just absolutely wow. So these cars are starting at around £15,000 in today's market. For a good one, I think you're looking at about 20,000 plus. Obviously, when you are looking at these, there's two type of tax brackets. So there's the earlier models, which is like the 06, etc. They are £340, whereas the later ones are £600. So it's a substantial difference right there. I mean, obviously the prices will fluctuate with time, as they are trying to wean these big V8s and petrols out. But for the time we're in, a saving of £300 is quite huge. So I'd probably go for the earlier versions if I was looking for one. So obviously with any car you are going to have a few common faults at this stage, and the first one will be the DRC suspension system. Now this does tend to leak, and the Steelers are probably your best bet to get that repaired, but most people now do just go for the easy option of replacing the system with coilovers. It's cheaper, it's easier, and plus it makes the car look better. This specific model doesn't have the DRC issue, it does have the coilovers. I think it really gives it a nice stance as well. Definitely, if the car you're viewing does have a DRC system, make sure there's no leaks and it's all in order. Another common issue on these cars is the oil cooler. Now the oil cooler tends to leak because the pipes that they're made out of are a weak metal, so this is the problem it's had since factory. There is a method of repairing the pipes, but I wouldn't recommend this as the problem can arise again. So the best thing to do with that is, even if the car you're looking at has no leaks, I'd probably change them as a precautionary measure for the future. And the final problem, which is probably the main problem, is the carbon buildup that these cars have. So the 4.2 is notorious for this, and it is pretty expensive to get a carbon clean. So a way to indicate if the car you're viewing has got a carbon buildup is it will be down on power. So the best thing to do is see as many cars as you can to get a real feel of what they like and what they drive like, because some people on the dyno have given results of like 360, 370 brake horsepower, when in fact out of the box this car is 14 brake horsepower, so that's a substantial loss of power in a sports saloon like this. So definitely get that checked. To avoid getting this problem in the future, I'd probably say you have to give the car a good thrashing every now and then. It just avoids building up the carbon. But with a sound like this, you're never going to have a problem taking it for a good old Sunday drive. Another little minor issue it has is the flaps on the exhaust tend to get stuck. So the best remedy for this would be to unplug the vacuum lines, and it's called a Golf Tee mod, so people get a Golf Tee and they block the vacuum lines. This is also a bit of a cheap mod, because if you don't want to get the exhaust done and you're not looking at modifying the car and you want to keep it original, this is probably the best bet, because you will get a bit of sound out of it because the valves will always be open. So as the title suggests, this video is all about why you should buy an RS4, and being specific, a B7 RS4. So the first reason I do think you should get one is because this is the most engaging RS Audi ever made, and as well as being engaging, you've got the flip side to it. It can be practical if you want. So like I said at the start, with the push of the S button, it becomes the best driving cars you probably will ever get into. And for the best part of £20,000, you're not going to get a car which gives you the thrills that this does. The way the steering wheel feels, the short throw gearbox, and just as an overall driving package, I don't think there is many cars out there that can beat this. Second reason I think you should buy one of these is because they're only going to go up in value. You've seen the B5 RS4 and they're almost touching £30,000-40,000 at the minute, and this B7 is definitely the best of the bunch, so it's only going to go one way, and that's up. And at the minute they're touching £20,000 for a decent example, so now's the best time to get your hands on one, because it is a legendary car and it will go down in history. So give it 5-10 years and you're not going to be able to probably afford one. As well as that, it's a bit of an investment, so you can't really go wrong with it. The final point why I think you should buy one is because this car is definitely going down in history as one of the best RS's ever made. This car paved the way for the RS's of today. They dropped a Lamborghini steering wheel into it. It was one of the first cars I think there was on the market with the Recaro buckets, and they're an icon in RS cars now, and I think every RS car has to have a set of buckets. It just makes an RS car an RS car. They switched up the torque balance to the 60/40. The understeer problem that Audi always had, they got rid of it, and it was this car that set that benchmark for the new RS's. And if it wasn't for this car, who knows where Audi would have been today, because there would have been no real urgency to make the RS better. So it's definitely going to be a staple in the history of Audi. And if that's not a good enough reason for you to buy it, then this definitely is. And it's just something that I'll never get old. So then, in conclusion, this car is one of the best Audis ever made. It's a true driving machine and it's full of character. I've got to really admit, this car's torn me between this and the M3. But in the next video we get our hands on the C63, so we'll see which one of these mid-sized sports cars ticks the most boxes and we think that you should buy. But that's everything for today. If this is the first time you're watching our channel, make sure you like, share, comment and subscribe. And to see more live car content, follow us on Instagram, which is on the screen now. And for any business inquiries or a quote on any of the work we do, drop us a message on our business Instagram at Lister Autos. But thanks for watching, guys. Take care and we'll catch you next time. Oh yeah, and just before we go, as usual, here's some bloopers.